As your woodland or your stand matures, it'll reach a stage where biologically it's able to start to regenerate. The trees are bearing cones and seeds, and it's also likely in a lot of situations to start to reach a stage where it's economically reached maturity in terms of finding the right size and development to reach the appropriate market for the species that you're growing in your woodland. When you reach this stage, it's a really good opportunity to start thinking about regeneration, to start thinking about restocking, and to start thinking about your final harvesting. Any decisions you make around this will depend on the species and the markets you're trying to work towards, and that will also depend on whether you've got a conifer or a broadleaf woodland. So for example, this stage tends to start around 40 years old for conifers, but can be quite a bit later for broadleaves, so you might be looking towards 70 years before you start to think about this. Any plans that you might have for regeneration or harvesting obviously need to be underpinned by a sound management plan, and that should be UK Forestry Standard compliant. Ensuring you've got a UK Forestry Standard compliant management plan is a brilliant way of making sure that any operations you're planning are sustainable. And crucially, any harvesting work that you want to do or any felling work that you want to do has to be underpinned by a felling licence. That's a legal requirement. And by going through the process of a management plan, you end up in a situation where you can get a felling licence which matches the criteria for your site. Why a felling licence is really important is because when we do any harvesting, we remove any significant volume of timber, we need to make sure that restocking is in place to avoid deforestation. Whilst you're going through this process, it's really useful also to have an up-to-date woodland condition assessment. Having an up-to-date woodland condition assessment will tell you a lot about what levels of regeneration are already happening within your woodland, the health of the trees, the diversity of the tree species within your woodland, and it gives you a good opportunity to think about how you might be able to tweak that through restructuring of your woodland, through felling and through regeneration. The method that you decide to choose for regenerating your woodland will depend again, as I say, on your objectives. You might choose to do clear felling, which is where your trees have reached an age where they're economically mature, they're ready to hit the market, and you fell an area of trees and then restock that area, whether that's restocking through planting or a combination of planting and regeneration. You can also do small group felling, where you fell smaller areas and allow those to regenerate, or you might choose to move towards more of a continuous cover forestry type system, where you start to use natural regeneration and perhaps underplanting or small group felling to regenerate standard trees underneath the existing trees, such as the woodland behind me. The stand behind me is 75, 80-year-old Douglas fir, which economically is about hitting the sweet spot for this species, some really nice timber in there, and it's also starting to regenerate, as you can see. In this particular instance, they'll be able to remove individual trees, selectively felled trees, to enhance light levels reaching the woodland floor and to start to encourage greater levels of regeneration, and we'll start to see a new stand of trees develop underneath this one. When you come to do any harvesting, it's really important to make sure that you get good advice and that you've undertaken your due diligence before harvesting begins. You need to think about any protected species or any sensitive areas in your woodland that you'll need to protect and consider through harvesting. And you also need to take into account the fact that you could have public access and members of the public using your woodland who you need to keep safe and protect from forest operations. So getting a good early start on your planning is really, really important, but also it's really worth thinking about getting professional advice at this stage if you haven't already. If you would like any further advice, I suggest you visit gov.uk/manage-woodland.